Welcome to AEDT 4120, Serious Gaming and Simulations. Week 6, Serious Games Design, video clip 2 of 4. I'm Professor Bill Kapralos, and over the next few minutes, we'll be discussing designing games as learning tools, and this is part 2 of 4. However, prior to doing so, here's the list of analysis questions for this particular video clip. Number 1. Which quadrant does game-based learning fall on in the gameplay versus learning space? Number 2. Can we have high learning and low gameplay? Number 3. What happens if a serious game doesn't have enough learning? And finally, number 4. What happens if a serious game doesn't have enough gameplay or engagement? Gameplay and learning. How do we combine what appear to be two very different phenomena to ultimately develop an effective serious game that is fun and engaging at the same time? According to Mark Prensky, it helps if we think of game-based learning along two dimensions that need to be combined effectively in order to create an effective serious game, or a learning game as referred to by Mark. The two axes are known as gameplay and engagement along the vertical axis and learning along the horizontal axis. And each axis is further divided into low and high. So we can have low and high gameplay and engagement, and we can also have low and high learning. And this divides our two-dimensional space into 4 discrete quadrants. If your resulting application delivers both low gameplay and low learning, it's probably a traditional computer-based training or e-learning application. And this occupies the lower left quadrant. A pure or a typical consumer game typically delivers high gameplay but no learning of traditional educational content, aside from the learning that actually takes place. And this occupies the upper left quadrant. Digital game-based learning or serious game occupy the high gameplay and high learning upper right quadrant. And finally, when we refer to high learning with low engagement, according to Mark Prensky, this is a null category, and it just doesn't exist. In other words, you can't have high learning with very low engagement. However, as Mark Prensky points out, even within the digital game-based learning quadrant, there exists plenty of variation. Each dimension itself within that quadrant can be seen as a continuum, and each project or each application has a different amount of both learning and engagement. Ideally, you want to move out continuously on a 45-degree line, balancing gameplay and learning. Or in other words, as gameplay and engagement increases, so does learning. Although there may be reasons in a given situation to provide a greater emphasis towards one or the other side, so towards more gameplay or towards more of the learning. And according to Mark Prensky, he's not sure whether it's a good idea to have the ability to lean towards one of the two sides. Mark also points out the idea of having a slider as part of the game interface itself, so that this way the user could choose his or her own mix between learning and engagement based on their mood at the time. This actually is an interesting concept. Is it possible to actually allow the gameplay to be adjusted dynamically according to the player's mood? When developing game-based learning applications, serious games, and simulations, one must continuously be aware of the fact that there are two dimensions to consider: gameplay and learning. When not enough emphasis is placed on learning, you risk developing an application that is nothing more than an entertainment game. However, when not enough emphasis is placed on gameplay, you risk creating an application that is nothing more than an e-learning application. So it is much better to think about keeping both dimensions high than to think about trading them off. According to Mark Prensky, the process of creating digital game-based learning, serious games, is as follows. Number 1. Find or create a game with great gameplay that will engage the audience. Number 2. Find the learning activities and techniques that will teach what is required, doing each with the other in mind. And finally, number 3, successfully blend the two. Of course, this is far more easier said than done, and doing this can be challenging and is in fact very difficult. Of course, you must also take into account the political context, the technology that's available to you, and to your users more specifically, and the resources that are available. This brings us to the end of our discussion on designing games as learning tools, part 2. Part of the material that was described in this particular video clip comes from Mark Prensky in his article Computer Games and Learning, Digital Game-Based Learning. This article appears in the Handbook of Computer Game Studies. This also brings us to our list of analysis questions. Number 1. Prensky suggests a slider as part of the interface so that the user can choose his or her own mix between learning and engagement based on their mood at the time. What do you think of this idea? Will it work? Explain your answer. Number 2, taking the slider idea from the previous question, what if this was automated in some way without the player or the user being aware of it? Is it possible to have gameplay and learning adjusted independently depending on the player's actions in the game? Discuss your answer. And this brings us to the end of this video clip. Thank you.